Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, suckers, truckers and eyebrow pluckers, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And the small asterisks that we place above and little else in our melodic introductions to this channel are once again being utilised and weaponised this morning with the second instalment of our extracurricular series Slashing, which I very cleverly termed Slashing at Hacks, as I'm sure you'll remember, during which I take myself and my money down to a superstore here in Britain and find myself either a newspaper or a newsletter or some sort of publicatory magazine that has a political bent either way, or is a little bit centrist, or just in general discusses current affairs. And this week I collected a copy of The Spectator, which is run by... I can't quite remember who does this. It's Fraser Nelson, I think. I think is at least an associate editor of it. That's the most famous name that comes to my mind. We have checked our political navigation system for this week, and it has told us to veer right, ladies and gentlemen. Last week we had The New Statesman, this week we have The Spectator, and on the front cover you have the COVID farce, typically sensationalist. We needed an inquiry. This isn't it. That's Carl Hennigan, who is the epidemiologist who we will consult with great intricacy in a moment. But we have on the front here caricatured Mr. Johnson, Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson, in the stocks with a fine glass of Merlot in his hand. We've got Mr. Dominic Cummings, who is obviously being scurrilously ridiculous with his WhatsApp messages there, pointing at Mr. Johnson. You have the King's Counsel barrister, whom some deem to be, I don't know, a little, not perhaps idiotic, but perhaps not quite being as purposeful as he might be. We've got all sorts more fiasco, maelstrom, jamboree stuff going on down here. We've got a Scotch chair, we've got masks. Obviously, that is meant to denote the stupidity of our times. And a few honourable mentions before we go through some of the articles in here. Just on the back, we have an advert for exorbitant timepieces, I'm sure you'll agree. Patek Philippe, who give their watches to Russian oligarchs, Formula One drivers, yacht owners, those who have managed to grab hold of assets via Wall Street. That's the usual clientele for Patek Philippe. So quite why they think that The Spectator is a great place to pop their product on the back of, I'm not sure, given that most of the Spectator readership is famously quite stern and parsimonious. They don't part with a penny. And given that most of the rest of the adverts are about insurance and asset management, you would presume, just by virtue of being conservatives, rather cautious, that don't want to spend £20,000, which is a nurse's income, on something that goes onto their wrists. But nonetheless, here it is. I also wanted to say I'm sure you guys would have noticed this as well, how bizarre it is that all of these luxury brands, whether it's Patek Philippe or whether it's an Audi electric car or whether it's people who install luxury cinemas into your huge houses, just how they try and tap into some sort of innovative Promethean human desire. They'll say things like, oh, don't stand still, go forward, be your own motion, and all this cartoonish nonsense. This is no different. We have a 24 automatic, begin your own tradition. And of course you will notice they've presented the company, or the watch rather, on the wrist of a rather pretty lady, who of course psychosexually and through the polymorphous perverse universe I of course want to sleep with, and therefore that means that as a human adult heterosexual male I am more likely to part with my £20,000 in order to buy the watch. So that's that. As we go through, there are three or four articles that I wanted to highlight. The opening piece being The New Censors. This is written by... I can't remember who the hell wrote this opening section. But it is, unfortunately, it's contradictory on its own terms. It actually tries to refute itself mid-article. So it's all about, there was an AI safety meeting last week that I briefly mentioned on this channel, and there was all sorts of stuff about online safety, which Jonathan Haidt goes into later on. But this is stuff about the influence that social media companies have on... what would you say, moral thought, political opinion, and their role in perhaps silencing or at least sidelining views that they might deem to be of poorer quality or of less veracity. It's all very good. Does Facebook actively try to discourage dissent about lockdown theory? The more mundane truth is that algorithms are simply primed to look for any articles or arguments deemed sensitive. And it's all punchy, it's pretty adversarial. It mentions Nick Clegg, who's gotten his moral high horse now that he's out of office. Nick Clegg, the famous leader of the Liberal Democrats, who promised myself and probably about another 10 million students that if he were elected to government, he would wipe away any student debt and there wouldn't be any henceforth. And of course, when he went into coalition government with David Cameron's Conservative Party, he completely and utterly went back upon that. And so anything he says should be taken with a pinch of salt. He's a complete and utter buffoon. But he's mentioned in here. Obviously, the first two-thirds of the article are excellent. It tells us how, very often, what the idiots, the blue-haired idiots, who just happen to run, they don't run Twitter anymore, but they run Facebook, YouTube, that sort of lot, the San Francisco guys, how obviously something that they seem disagreeable is very, very easily wiped off of the map, and that's all jolly well and fine. But of course, this article then suddenly engages in some self-indulgence, I just hate it when these right-wing commentators who are always talking about being, as I say, sort of punchy and sucking it up and being cruel to be kind, all of a sudden then just sort of wallow in self-pity about the fact that some of their crude, weird little lockdown theories didn't make it onto the internet because they were demonstrably and objectively wrong. So again, this article is contradictory on its own terms. It starts off really well, but then soon descends into self-pity in the fetal position at the end. But so that was the first article. That was the opening bit. The main the main section that the Spectator ran on was, of course, it's titled "The COVID Whitewash." The Haidt inquiry is asking all the wrong questions. That, of course, in Great Britain is the COVID inquiry that is currently being undergone, and I don't know what its sort of touted purposes are. I know what its nominal purposes are, but I don't know what the guys at the helm, or guys and girls at the helm, really want to do. I think rather than it being a sort of evaluation of our strategy at the time, I think it just wants to root out many of the people that did ill. I can't think that it wants to do much more than that. This is Carl Hennigan, who tells us that he is an epidemiologist. We have, again, our small caricature there. It starts off really nice. So he obviously criticises the KC, that's the King's Counsel barrister that's running this, saying that he's a bit of a sensationalist and just wants to talk about the muck of WhatsApp messaging groups rather than address the more implementable problems of what went wrong with graphing and mapping and data. It runs thusly. Instead, we have a KC who seems uninterested in substance and obsessed with reading out rude words he has found in other people's private messages. What Dominic Cummings said about his colleagues in moments of exasperation is treated like the real substance of the issue. The whole inquiry seems to be working on the premise that we should have locked down harder, sooner and longer, and that, if we had, SARS-CoV-2 would have melted away like snow. Follow the models will probably be the inquiry's motto. Now, I was a very staunch and very desperate young man when the COVID crisis hit just over 3 or 4 years ago. I was addicted to social media like most of my contemporaries and peers, and so I took a rather harder line than I would on lockdown nowadays. But yet, I'm trying not to be banned off YouTube by becoming a heretic. I am still yet to be shown a graph which showed that the imposition of a draconian lockdown, which curtailed civil liberties and all the rest of it, actually really, or you could correlate that draconian lockdown with the reduction in the numbers of COVID deaths or cases. I still haven't seen data which shows that things would have been an awful lot, orders of magnitude different if we hadn't have locked down, rather than just really guard those that were the most vulnerable for a period of time, and to have made sure that the care home disaster didn't occur in this country. If you don't know, essentially what happened was nurses, for a period of a fortnight, were allowed to jump from care home to care home. They transmitted an awful lot, and of course the people in care homes, I don't know whether you've ever noticed, but they can't really go to the toilet for themselves, poor folks, and so lots perished that way. I still haven't seen data which, as I say, shows me that lockdowns had a real noticeable impact on cases and deaths. I don't think I've seen that data. I'd love to see it. I really want to champion what we did. I don't want to say I told you so, because at the time I was a sort of bustling idiot. But that's okay. And then Carl Hennigan sort of takes my line. It's clear now that this inquiry, which may end up costing £250 million in and of itself, is evolving into attack on those who question the official policies of lockdown, mask wearing and so on. If officialdom is turning a blind eye to the results of lockdown in an attempt to exculpate its architects, the inquiry will be a missed opportunity of historic proportions. Academics who wish to have an evidence-based conversation need to go elsewhere. Our hope will be that the free press shows an interest that the inquiry does not. There is too much at stake for us not to have this conversation. And high time and quite right. So that was a jolly good bit that I enjoyed reading. Then there are a few honourable mentions. Douglas Murray gets a regular column in this. I usually agree with him on all sorts, but I don't know, I think he's generally in the right about Israel-Hamas, but he just seems to be gripped by a bit of mania. But this was upcoming, not only the best article I have ever read in The Spectator, it's probably the best one of the best pieces you'll read, if not all week, then all year. It's Fraser Nelson, who is, I think, the associate editor. I might be misspeaking there, but he has interviewed Professor Jonathan Haidt at the ARC conference. Any of you guys see this? It was headed pretty much, or headlined, would be more apposite phrase, headlined by Jordan Peterson. I believe it's an acronym for the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship. Forgive me if I'm getting that wrong, but I think that's it. With these mercurial, capricious, sort of weird dark web intellectual figures. That Niall Ferguson's wife was there. Her name evades me. Former Australian Prime Minister, what's his name? Jonathan. I can't remember his name. It's just Jonathan. No, I can't remember. It's good to evade me. But yeah, lots of weird figures. John Anderson. Christ, came to me. Lots of weird figures, all talking about why the world's a worse place now that women have a slight autonomy over their bodies and can be in the workplace without being sexualized. But anyway, this was a sort of gem that we found from that conference. Professor Jonathan Haidt on how smartphones are damaging a generation. Childhood has been rewired. So you can see there some lovely little artwork there which depicts our neurology being completely affected by attention deficit and all of these social media companies. This is just gorgeous. It's written gorgeously and is, of course, completely veracious all the way through. It's all absolutely correct. So we've just got to talk about essentially posits that increased anxiety and the so-called mental health crisis in this world can all be put at the door of attention-grabbing social media, the worst of which is obviously TikTok and things like that. So let us read some of this. Social media, he concluded, that's Jonathan Haidt, was shaping their view that society is in permanent conflict, which in turn led to ideas about microaggressions and competitive victimhood. All this, he found, was damaging young people's mental health. He's working on a book due out next year and is ready to share his thesis. So he talks, we've got some quotations in here. I'm calling it the Great Rewiring of Childhood. It hit the US, Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand in exactly the same way. Social media is a bit of a misnomer. It's no longer about connecting people but performing on a platform. Perhaps this is fine for grown-ups but not for children, where they can say things in public, including to strangers, and then be publicly shamed by potentially millions of people. Children should not be on social media. They should be playing in person. Social media platforms should never be accessed by children until they're 18. That sounds rather draconian. It's just insane that we let these kids do the same things. If he thinks that all platforms are equally dangerous, it's hard to imagine anyone getting up to mischief on LinkedIn, for example. And then quotations, TikTok is probably the worst for their intellectual development. I think it literally reduces their ability to focus on anything while stuffing them with little bits of stuff that was selected by an algorithm for emotional arousal. Again, not a syllable of that was incorrect. That was obviously reasonably well written and was completely correct. It was, absolutely thrilling for somebody that is pretty much part of the technological indigeny. I do remember a time when phones weren't, strapped to our hips, and that they were just something that you hung from a wire on a wall. I'm 21 for those concerned. Leave your phone numbers and Instagram accounts down below. I do remember a time when phones weren't a thing, but generally I can't envisage life whereby this bidirectional digital media, screen interfaces weren't a huge part of your day unless you actively seek to counteract it. And it's alarming how little credence much of these, again, idiots that are always on social media who want to lobby the government to give them more funding for their mental health institutions, how little credence they give to the fact that most of their incoming clientele are actually just people that are on their phones for 14 hours a day, and comparing themselves to the quixotic ideals of celebrities that have reached fame and people that are gorgeous and people that are really manly and masculine, and they're comparing themselves to essentially Dickensian gargoyles that don't really exist. This is not very often said, and so it makes you unpopular. It makes you sound like some sort of Cromwellian killjoy, some Calvinist, some cave-dwelling anchorite, some religious idiot that just doesn't want to sap pleasure from the world. This of course isn't true. We just care about safety. But Haidt is quite prescriptive again in this. So he gives us 3 rules. So he says, there are 3 great untruths of social media. The first is that they are fragile and can be harmed by speech and words. Obviously you can't be. Next, that their emotions, and especially their anxieties, are reliable guides to reality. And finally, that society is one big battle between victims and oppressors. All, of course, correct. He gives 3 rules. Rule 1, he says, no smartphones before the age of 14. And what if they say they'll be cut off from their friends? You just give them a flip phone. Millennials had flip phones. They texted each other. And then rule 2, no social media before 16. If half the kids are not on social media, they actually meet up after school and they do fun things. They'll become the cool kids. And then his 3rd rule is no phones in school. It is really simple. I watched on Good Morning Britain, there is an upstanding and usually rather effective and inquisitive and professional and consummate journalist by the name of Susanna Reid, and she was with the unfortunate father of somebody who had a young girl, about 14, who had killed themselves in Harrow in Great Britain. And of course, he is now an online safety activist. And rather than admit that the world it is completely within the power of parents to just put somebody's phone away, rather than just relying on than Mark Zuckerberg to completely dump his algorithm and therefore lose engagement and therefore lose profit. All parents should just say, you're not having that. You're not having that until you're 16. It's obviously and demonstrably deleterious to your mental health. It's not making sure that you can engage in adequate conversation. It's making you unpersonable. It's making you a git. You're not having it. Certainly what will be happening with my kids. I absolutely love this article. I shared it on my Instagram story for those concerned. That pretty much runs it. There's bits from... there were bits about... so our regular reviewers choose the books that they have most enjoyed reading in 2023. Books of the year. So we have Andrew Motion, who talks about Something Old Made New, The Iliad in Emily Wilson's muscular and moving new translation, the first by a woman, because apparently the gender of the translator matters about the quality of a work. Don't forget that, folks. Is truly what it claims to be. And Something New, Hannah Sullivan's second collection of poems, Was It For This? We've got somebody praising Zadie Smith. I love Zadie Smith's The Fraud, which immersed me as thoroughly as a good Victorian novel should. I'm delighted that Paul Murray's The Bee Sting has made the book a shortlist. It's funny and sad and human and joyous. I didn't think much to many... I've only circled a few, as you can see. I didn't think much to that book section because, I don't know... I just didn't enjoy reading it. And then one of the final things I want to talk about is Thin Gruel. There we are, Thin Gruel, and there's Mr. John Foss, the novelist. If John Foss's novels are experimental, they're experiments in exhausting banality, says Philippe Henscher. The Nobel Prize for Literature this year was awarded to the Norwegian novelist and playwright John Foss. I have no idea who that is, but there are a few sections on here. I don't follow who wins the Booker or the Nobel, or who wins the ice cream prize for flavour or whatever. I don't follow that type of thing. A few excerpts here which just sounds like stream of consciousness bilge that I won't be interested in. A reasonable article talking about his effect on his readership, which was good. But that essentially concludes our look through The Spectator for, I think this was out November the 4th, so I'm getting it a little bit late, but it's still current, still for this week. And the only thing, well, one of the few things that I will criticise about this magazine is that most people on the right in this country, and for the left for that matter, but the right aren't often held to account for this, is that it's shot through with culture. John Cleese talking about the decline of comedy, an old rich man that suddenly realises that you can't make a xenophobic joke and so can't be on the television anymore. Douglas Murray, Toby Young, even the stuff that Haidt and Fraser Nelson talked about was very culture-centric. That they are curiously absent on issues regarding the economy. If you were to say, if you were to poll people, I'm sure tomorrow morning the most exigent issue in their life right now is being able to afford a bottle of milk and a sack of potatoes, not regardless of whether you think it objective truth or not, whether somebody can identify as an African elephant or not. That doesn't really, it doesn't have a much of a, it's not something that somebody can feel in their real lives, whereas, of course, lacking £10 to pay for the chili con carne at Tesco is, of course, a real demonstrable issue. The left obviously make culture their own thing. The right do it as well, but yet nothing in response to the largest tax burden since the Second World War or anything like that. That was The Spectator for this week. I don't know what the hell I'm going to buy next week. We've gone left and gone right. I suppose we could just pivot and alter on that basis. This was Slashing at Hacks by your favourite cultural and political commentator, Joseph Spivey. Thank you ever so much for watching BookTube, and goodbye.